Hi, I'm Mr. Simons, and in this video we're going to talk about free trade. So we're going to talk about what it is and what are the advantages and disadvantages. So let's get started. Okay, so we're starting here with this idea of what is free trade. So if we're thinking about free trade, we're really talking about two potential situations. So we've got free trade and we've got protection, two possible situations. If we talk about free trade, then this is what the focus is. If we've got free trade, we're talking about the free flow of goods and services between nations. There are no roadblocks or barriers to trade occurring between different nations. So everybody is able to sell their goods to all countries in the world. If we have a situation of protection, what we've got artificial barriers to trade that protect domestic firms from foreign competition. And these artificial barriers to trade are not organized by the firms themselves. Instead, they are imposed by governments. And the idea is to help domestic firms. Okay, if we're getting specific, looking at some definitions here, free trade is a situation where there are no artificial barriers to trade imposed by governments. That idea of these artificial barriers to trade is very important to remember, right? Artificial barriers to trade, okay. Artificial barriers to trade, that refers to protection, so that opposite situation to free trade. Now, if we're looking at protection, the goal of protection is to shield or protect domestic producers from foreign competition. And that is that goal. And this goal is really opposite or contrary to the goals of free trade. Okay, if we move down here, that free trade is based on the idea that countries should specialize, okay? So let's break this down slowly. Specialize here means that countries should produce particular goods or services, especially the ones that they are best at. So if you think about it, let's say you're really good at soccer and volleyball, and at some point the coaches say, well, you have to specialize in the sport in which you are the best at. So with free trade, the idea is countries specialize and they only produce particular goods and services where they are the best, where they are most efficient, right? Where they are most efficient. And when we talk about most efficient, what we really mean is this. So if you remember, the problem or the story of economics is all about choices, that we have to make choices in terms of production for governments, for economies, that we can't make everything. So what happens is that a country is most efficient when it has to give up less of other goods when it produces one good. So if it could produce like wheat and butter, it should produce the good in which it gives up less of the other good when it's producing. And the idea is then that one country produces what they are most efficient, then another country produces what they are most efficient. And so what happens is that countries then trade for the other goods. So they trade for these goods. So every country specializes in the good that they're most efficient, and then they trade to get the rest. Okay, now let's focus on the advantages and disadvantages of free trade. And we'll start with the good stuff, the advantages of free trade. So one advantage of free trade is that countries can gain additional goods. so that countries trade for those extra goods that they are less efficient at producing, and then overall consumers get access to more goods in the economy. And this is a real positive for free trade. The second idea of free trade is that countries can specialize, so produce those goods where they are most efficient. This means that they are giving up less of other goods. So if you're only producing the goods that you are the best at, well, then you're going to waste fewer resources and you're going to use those limited resources you have much better. And when we talk about resources, we can talk about things like people or raw materials. That because we are more efficient, we are not wasting so much of those precious resources. Another thing about free trade is that it encourages the spread of innovation and technology. And this is because countries are linked with each other. They haven't put up those trade barriers to restrict the flow of goods and services. That free flow of goods and services means that innovation and technology can move freely between countries, that there really is that lack of trade barriers, that lack of roadblocks that would restrict the flow of innovation and technology. The next thing is that free trade will give countries higher living standards and lower prices. So let's have a look at how this might happen. Other countries can produce the other goods more efficiently. So this means that there's less wasted resources and that they can produce those goods at lower prices. So then what can happen is that one country can import those goods, bring those goods in at lower prices, and then give consumers access to more goods at lower prices. So when we talk about living standards here, higher living standards, well, let's just call this number 4 to keep it consistent. Higher living standards, that simply means access to more goods and services. And that more goods and services occurs at lower prices because other countries can produce these goods and services more efficiently with less wasted resources. And when we talk about international competitiveness, what we mean is that countries can sell those exports at the lowest prices, that they are most competitive in terms of the prices that they charge. Okay, here we are in terms of the disadvantages of free trade. Free trade can lead to short-term unemployment. Why is that the case? Well, this is the reason here. With free trade, there is no protection of local industries. So local industries are not being shielded or supported from foreign competition. So what happens then is if there's no protection of local industries, some local firms cannot compete with those imports coming from overseas. They just can't do it because they are inefficient. They waste resources. They don't produce at the lowest cost. And then unfortunately, as a result, some firms might have to close down. Now, take it the next step. If some firms might have to close down, what's going to happen to those workers? They're going to become unemployed. So one disadvantage of free trade that is often cited is that it could be a trigger for more short-term unemployment. Another disadvantage of free trade is that it could be difficult for less advanced economies to compete. So what do we mean by that? So the idea is that in some less advanced economies, that maybe some industries they have are not as developed. They're just starting out. What we might call them are infant industries. They're little baby industries that have not yet developed. And so these infant industries, they actually need a little bit of help from protection to get started, because otherwise they're just simply not strong enough to compete with foreign producers. So if there is a situation of no protection, also known as free trade, these local producers may never get established. A last disadvantage is where production surpluses, so extra production that is not needed or is surplus to requirements, could be dumped. What do we mean by this word dump? When something is dumped in terms of economics, what it is it's like surpluses for one country, surpluses from one country, are then sold below cost on world markets. So they're actually being sold below what local producers can produce it for. And if there's free trade, well then this can happen wherever because there are no barriers to stop it. So an argument against free trade is that we need protection or barriers to stop other countries selling their goods really cheaply in our country and putting our producers out of work. Okay, so that's the story with free trade. Thanks very much for watching. Leave a comment, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, see more videos. Okay, see you next time.